Open chat. Okay, okay. Mic seems to be working. Let me load up a model here because I need to grab a, what was I doing? It was recording. So I need to print some miniatures out. I just got a new 3D printer. I've been printing on it, but then I want to be a little bit more exact with what I want to print. So, because I've just been printing old models, shrinking them down, which has been okay. So let's go in here and let's say, I'm gonna grab this little guy right here, and we'll use him, and we'll pose him out, and we'll get to use some new ZBrush functionality. That'll be fun. And I can point you guys to some resources with that. And let me go to my body of work here, and then miniature dimensions, complete guide. I don't know, like 42, 54, somewhere in that range, miniature size. John Yu, how's it going, man? Let's make some miniatures. There is actually, if I go in here to Z plugin, what is it called? Sorry, I got very little sleep last night. Scale Master, set scene scale, and then going in here and messing around with the dimensions in here. Right now, boy, it seems quite big, but when you go through and set this, like if you set it to inches, which you can do, then it'll automatically set your preferences, transpose units to whatever unit scale you might be working with. I want to, I'm gonna try something. Z plugin, Scale Master, ZBrush Scale Unify. This is just one tool, so nothing fancy. Alright, so set scene scale, it's 181 millimeters. So if I drag this out in my preferences, unit scale, minor ticks, we don't need any minor ticks for millimeters. So let's hit W and then let's hit Y on our keyboard. And maybe not. Let me see. Preferences, minor ticks. Let's put that back to 10 because I would assume this would mean we ain't getting nothing. If I append, well, if I append a cube, this should be 2 units. I don't know. Something weird's going on with my units. That's interesting. Let's say delete this out of here. Let's go grab a just a cube 3D here, hit W and Y, and then make polymesh 3D so I can use it. There we go. So this one seems to be set appropriately. Here's 1 unit, 2 units, and 10, what do we call those? We call those minor ticks per unit. So I'm going to put that back down to 0. So now every major tick is 1 unit, which in ZBrush should be 1 millimeter by default. And so when I go here to here, that's 2. That makes sense. I'm actually, you know what? Let's append this guy here. So now if I drag on him, what is going on? Because he should be, according to this, about, and he's standing on the floor, which is fine. He should be about 2 units, but whenever I introduce him to the scene, I lose my what is going on? I lose my minor ticks. Interesting. Okay, this is a fun start. Let's do this. This is probably user error. And here's the other thing too. I don't really need to measure this. I can just create what I want to create, and then I can throw it onto the 3D printer and scale it there. But oh yeah, the proxy videos. We'll go over that some of this morning too. Oh man, I'm not off to a masterful start, but thanks for stopping by. Okay, let's try this again. We have a Rancor that is just a Dynamesh here. I'm going to go in here to W and then hit Y. This is my transpose line. And I am not getting anything from here. Okay, well, we don't need to measure. I'll measure later. And I can actually show you how to do that externally. But I need to give this guy a base. So I'm just kind of looking at this stuff. Looks like maybe just a generally round base. I'm going to do a little inset so that I can have a generic base that I can put a little inset rounded base into, and then I can stick his feet with key registration, or having like a little piece of geometry come out and like boolean into the base. So I'll show you just what I mean. So let's go ahead and just real quickly we'll do an append a cylinder 3D. We got the cylinder here. I'm going to hit Y on my keyboard so I can go back to gizmo mode and go out of transpose mode. When we pose this guy, we'll talk a little bit about transposing maybe. And we'll go ahead and shrink this down to about, I don't know, yay sized. And then we'll go ahead and give this a little bit, I have some extraneous loops over here. So let's go in here to geometry edge loop and we'll say delete loops. And then I'm going to shrink this top one down. So with ZBrush brush, BZM, hover over an edge, and we'll go ahead and just say scale. There we go, scale edge loop complete. And we'll just bring this back a little bit, and then we'll go in here to insert multiple edge loops, interactive elevation, click and pull, and then pull up a little bit. That'll give us a nice little rounded look. And then I'll just do a quick group by normals underneath your polygroup menu. In order to hold these edges, on the bottom especially, let's go in here to insert, hover an edge, insert single edge loop, and I'm just going to put in a few just little control loops in here just to kind of hold, like I said, hold those edges. On the top here, I'm going to do an inset, so we'll do hover over face, inset polygroup all legacy, excuse me, and I'm just going to tap Alt just to make sure we're getting new polygroups. So I'm going to say, okay, this little top base here, maybe it goes in about, it looks a little far, maybe it goes in about here, and then you know what, let's do, just so it's easy when I bring in my base and I want to push it down in there, or maybe I shouldn't. Think. My gut's telling me if we do another slight inset and then we do a Q mesh polygroup all, and then just hold down shift as you pull this down, that'll give it a little bit of just kind of it opens up and it'll release a little bit better. If I was going to bake this into a normal map, I'd do that just to get a little bit more meat on that distance there, so it would read better on a map. But since we're just doing this for modeling and printing, I don't know that I really have to do that. I could probably put that straight down. Let's do that for now. I can always change it later. So we're going to say Q mesh polygroup all, and instead of doing an inset, I'm just going to pull that straight down about yay big, and then this will just be my generic base. So if I want to, I go in here to crease PG, that's under your geometry crease menu, crease PG, and then I can go in here, I'll do it over here, dynamic, crease level of 2, smooth subdiv of 3, that'll give me a nice little fall off, and then we have just a nice little generic base. Now we are getting, if you get any scalloping in here, anything you need to go through here and say like do an inset polygroup all legacy and just kind of pull in edge loops, or again go in here to insert single edge loop and just put in some control loops. You can do Shift D to turn off your dynamic if you want. So I think that'll be fine. Okay, so we have D for dynamic to turn it on, and then Shift D to turn it off. And then if I want to put my little, so here's my rounded base, and then I want to put like a little base to put his feet into, stick his feet into. We can do that, and I'm just going to steal this geometry. I can go through here if you wanted to. You could say hover over this and say, again, back to our hover over face, Q mesh, polygroup all, and then you can just pull on this and hold down control, and that'll pop this out, and then you can go through here. Let's do polygroup island instead of polygroup all, so we can tap Alt, give it a new polygroup, so we can just do that. However, I kind of want it down in this area, so what I'm going to do instead is just duplicate this off, Control Shift tap that polygroup, geometry modified topology, delete hidden, and then we'll go in here and we'll say insert single edge loop, hold down Alt, and then Q mesh polygroup island up, and let's take a look at this. So right now, if let's tap D to get a nice smooth result, and then again tap D to get a nice smooth result, and we'll crease PG there. Right now this is going to be flush, so we want to give ourselves a little wiggle room here. So I'm going to go through here and say Q mesh polygroup island. Actually, let's do two things first. I'm going to do again, hover over an edge, insert single edge loop. We're going to give ourselves a few control loops here, and then on the top here I'm going to actually delete this polygroup. So Control Shift tap that polygroup, Control Shift drag to invert that selection, geometry modified topology, delete hidden. hover over an edge, close, convex hole, click and pull, and we'll just kind of round out just a little rounded top. You can put as much geometry on there as you want. If that's too much, you can go through here. Let's go ahead and Control-Shift, Control-W to make that all one polygroup, and then Control-Tap this polygroup to unmask it. I'm going to put this down here, and I'm just going to scale this down so we can kind of just variably modify that. So we have this. We're going to say crease PG, got a little rounded area here, and if I want to bring that whole top down, I can just unmask it, Control-Alt-Drag, and then we can just bring that down. So something like this. Crease PG, D on our keyboard for dynamic, and then again these two are flush right here, so I'm going to hover over this edge, Q mesh polygroup island, and then instead of Q meshing, I'm going to hold down Shift as I pull on that face, and that'll kind of back off that entire island. However, I need to unmask the bottom part. There we go. There you go. So I can actually just kind of pull this in a little bit. Doesn't need to be much probably, but I mean, we're working pretty small. That's another thing I need to keep in mind, is that I'm making like all these little tiny adjustments, and this is like, you know, a fraction of a millimeter there. So, you know, error on the side of maybe too much. Okay, we got our base, and we'll go ahead and let's turn off X-symmetry, reset here, and we'll move him up a little bit. I assume that's a male Rancor, I really don't know. And then let's go ahead and, so let's talk about proxy pose and scaling and how we can use that to add contrast to our models. Cool, good morning everybody. FBX files changing their Y position after importing exporting ZBrush. There's something I might be missing. There is, if you wanna, there's one troubleshooting thing you can do when you're exporting anything out of ZBrush, but is to create your own bounding box. FBXs should do that for you and keep it pretty consistent, but if you are, I'm not going to say this is going to fix it, but if you're getting some weird stuff going on with your position, when you leave a ZBrush and then you go into another program and it's fine, and then you bring it back in and it's offset a certain distance, sometimes things just get in a bad state. But one thing you can try to do is you can go in here to append a cube, for example, and then just make this cube the biggest thing in your scene, and to play it extra safe, what I like to do is hold down Shift, bent arrow, shoot it up to the top, and then just basically what you're doing is creating your own bounding box, and make sure it's across the x-axis, like perfectly symmetrical. Go in here, geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld on this big box that covers everything, just to ensure that, number one, it's symmetrical across the x-axis, it's covering or encapsulating everything in your scene. And then when you go in here and you say export, and you choose FBX, let's see, we'll throw this on our desktop here. Can I bring this up into view? Crap, hold on. Hold on, let me sneak this down here. So basically, visible or all, whichever you want to export. Smooth normals is best practice, and then hit OK. And then we'll hit OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to export everything in your scene, but it's going to use this as your, for sure, static bounding box. And hopefully that'll maintain its position in between programs. I'm not going to say that's for sure, just to kind of keep things hopefully good. Oh, waiting for options to finish. Oh, sorry, I actually exported that. And I didn't mean to. I'm going to do a little bit more research here. Let's go to images. I just want to see real quick. So we've got our base going. 26, 32, let's say 32 millimeters with a base. And then we can, again, we'll put some feet in there. And then we'll use this as a miniature printing thing. And I hope my computer didn't get in a bad state. It was booting up a little bit slowly, so I hope I'm not in like a weird... See, performance. Everything looks fine. It's not really doing much. Okay. Okay, so anyway, we have this, and so we're going to get rid of this cube here. And okay, So we want to pose this guy. You know what? For a miniature, depending on what scale we're printing at, that might actually not be too bad. It's not that great. Let me bring in some reference here. Let's go to everything. This is how I find all the files on my computer now. Let's see, open path, reference. So we got this reference here from Book of Boba Fett, I believe. Let's leave that up. Any full body ref? Ooh, there's some good back reference here. And is there one from the original? There we go. Here's the original. Oh, look at that grain. Okay, so I'm just gonna have this stuff up here. Actually, I might even have one. Hold on just a second. Let me launch a program. I'm gonna launch Quadro. More, run as administrator. Yes. And then I'm just gonna load up. Let me see if I have one here. Dang, I don't. Never mind. Okay, so again, I'm just gonna look through here. This is all fine. I'm gonna go in here to my damn standard 02, which you can find on the internet. I'm gonna put just a few more lines in here. I can detail up after I pose, and there might be some instances where, like, if an arm is bending a certain way, or if it's clothing or something. Oh, we could put clothing on this guy. That would be something I would do after posing, obviously, because a pose is gonna determine so much about, you know, the musculature and the cloth and stuff like that. But if he's the way this guy tends to move is pretty. He's not doing any dramatic Superman pose type thing, so I don't know that it'll be a huge deal, but we'll see. We have X. Oh, we don't have X. We do have X symmetry turned on, and this is just remember, this is just a Dynamesh. There is no subdivision history on here, and everything's all one piece of geometry. So really, really simple to move, which will actually come in handy when we go and do our final stuff. So here's a nice little flappa. What would this be called? Is like a pectoralis major skin flap a little bit here. And I'm not going to do any major detailing, just kind of generally looking at his neck and lumps. Let's go to the back here. Looks like he's got some cool leg lumps that go along here. So I'm just going to kind of use my standard brush, just kind of pull along here to kind of raise that up. And now this is interesting. So normally if I'm doing like this is getting into like the territory of I'm doing a high-res sculpt in Dynamesh, but I'm not going to do anything crazy like BSH and then turn on Sculptors Pro maybe and just kind of test laid out some crazy stuff. Or if I'm not even doing that, if I'm just going in here to like my move brush and just moving this stuff out, I'm not going to be stressing this geometry that much at this point. So people ask me sometimes like, well, when do you know like when you're going to go into like real detail mode and start detailing the hell out of something? Usually right about here. You know, I'm not doing it. All my primary and secondary forms are dialed in. I'm just kind of going in and doing a lot of tertiary forms and like eye bag wrinkles and little bumps and lumps on them that aren't going to really break the silhouette or really stress the geometry is what's the determining factor there. So if I'm done doing that, at this point, what I would normally do, let's go ahead in my standard brush. I'm going to crank up my lazy radius. That's underneath your stroke menu, lazy mouse. The lazy radius is set to 1 by default on your standard brush. The only problem with that is you can't put in bumps. You got to kind of click and drag. So to get around that, go into stroke. I usually just move my lazy radius up and then tap L on my keyboard just to turn lazy mouse off. So when I turn my lazy mouse on, it'll be nice and smooth. And then if I turn it off, just tapping L on my keyboard, then I can go in here and do my little lumpy bumpy work. So here's some lumpy bumps. We can just go through here and then again, go back to my damn standard 02 to put in the nice organic butt wrinkles here. We got this, we got this. Let's go in here to move Accu. That's move brush with your Accu turned on. So I can go through here. This will just allow you to kind of pull the like craggy points here. So we can go through here and we can kind of just pull to a little bit more like plate. Anyway, I think it's fine. So we've gone through, we've detailed it out enough, and now we just want to move this around. And what I was going to say is if previously, if I wanted to go through here and say, hey, I want to make his arm fatter, well, if you go through here and inflate, it's going to inflate your details too. So at this point, what I would do is go through and control tap to store this point in history. Actually, I'll give you a video for this because I just made it yesterday. Videos. So here is this channel here, and on this channel you have this, well, a bunch. So here's proxy pose is Z-sphere rigging, transpose master is Z-sphere rigging, and then ZBrush and project history refresher. This is basically what I'm talking about here. So we're going to say copy link address, and you can check this video out, but I'll give you the short version. So instead of, and in this point, instead of going through and ZBrushing and projecting the detail back, I now can easily go in here to geometry, proxy pose, which is way up here at the top. And by default, it's set to 0.5. You can just tap that, and that'll go ahead and set. It kind of does a super quick decimation that has that low res ZBrush to high res relationship, where it's like, hey, here's my low res envelope. I make any changes to that low res envelope, and then I can go back through my subdivision history, subdivision level 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I got my details back, right? So if I, on my subdivision level 1 in the old days, and still you can, go through here, and if I inflate this, I'm not inflating my details, I'm just inflating this envelope. So when I'm done with this and head out of proxy pose, my details just followed along, and now he has an inflated arm with the details following. So same thing as if you're going to pose some proxy pose, same thing as you're going to pose something, same idea. However, we can just undo out of that. This is really cool too. So while you click and drag that reduction amount, let's go ahead and turn our polyframe, you can see just on the fly, it's just giving you a low res envelope at the resolution of your choosing. If you look in the upper left, that's the percentage that it's decimating down essentially. So this is just creating that low res envelope, kind of like a wrap deformer a little bit, you know, and in Maya, where you just have an arbitrary piece of geometry that you can use as a former, or in Photoshop where it's like you have the lattice, is it called lattice? No, it's not called lattice deformer. Mesh deformer or something like that, where it's like, hey, here's a shape. We'll turn this shape into a mesh with points, and then you can pull each individual point around and it'll warp the image inside of that mesh, essentially. That's exactly what this is doing. It's basically a wrap deformer. So moving those high-res details around using this new low-res geometry. Yeah, so that's what you can do now, and we can just hop out of proxy pose, or what I would probably do is just Control Z to undo. It's a little bit faster. The traditional way to do this would be have X symmetry turned on, and still there's good reasons to do this still, and you can use proxy pose in conjunction with ZBrush, but I'm going to go through here. I'm going to say ZBrush, depth size down quite a bit, target polygon count maybe 20K. Again, I don't need super uniform. I mean, I always like it nicer if ZBrush gives me uniform geometry, but I do have some really weird details in the mouth and stuff I want to pick up. So that's why I'm keeping the adaptive size up a little bit, maybe in the 20s, so that when it sees those really harsh edge angle changes, it'll put more geometry in that area, as opposed to erring on the side of making everything more uniform but picking up less detail. Same thing in that proxy pose, that there's a detail amount, or we'll talk about that in a second. You can dial that in. There we go. So now we have a low-res version of our mesh. You can go in here and say hit half. You can use, well, let me show you in here. I always do that, don't I? For example, what are we doing? ZBrush. There's a bunch of stuff you can do in here. You can use polypaint to determine your polygon density. You can use poly groups in order to determine, like, hey, I want an edge ring here and an edge ring here. I'm not going to be that particular, but here is our ZBrush asset here. However, of course, we got to go back to our detailed state. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say edit, delete, old, or undo, just so I can show you this a little bit easier. So here is our ZBrush version. Here in history is our high-res geometry we want to project to, right? So Control tap this, go back here. I like to do just a quick project history, which is under your project menu here. You can do project all, which will project other subtools, or you can use project history, which will project to those points stored in history. So we projected, we can hit Control D to subdivide, and then we can project history again, Control D to subdivide. So now we're back up to about what we had before with our Dynamesh, and then project history. So just like proxy pose, if I go down here and say, okay, subdivision level 1, now we have something low res. It's not as low res as the proxy pose we were using, but now I can go through here and I can move around this big envelope of geometry here, our low res envelope, and then if I go back up in my subdivision history, my details will follow along. And we can also, here's another cool thing too, is, okay, we got this mesh here, it's got subdivision history. You can still hop in here to proxy pose at any point, and it's fine. It'll still work just fine. You can use this in conjunction with subdivision history, like so. Hop out of proxy pose. Now we're here back at our subdivision level. Our details follow it along, etc. One thing for miniatures that I find highly interesting is, for example, well, here's another cool thing. If you go down to subdivision level 1, again, you can pose and you can send things over to Transpose Master. You can also do that with Proxy Pose with all your subtools. But another cool thing is now we can go in here to like Z plugin, because I would never try to UV 620,000 points. What I would do is have a low res sub D1 that I would go in here and say, okay, UV master, we want to, symmetry's fine, we don't have any polygroups. We can just hit unwrap. And so I can unwrap this low res envelope, no problem. And then I can have those UVs be applied to my high res mesh. So instead of trying to UV, you know, 500,000 polygons, you can just do it to your low res envelope and then propagate those UVs up to your high res. If this will finish, it is kind of a complex object, and I didn't give it any help with polygroups or anything. So now we can go in here and we can hit flatten. Oops. Did I just unwrap this? Let me see. Work on clone is what I want to do. There we go. Unwrap. Beep, boop, beep. And like I said, you could go through here and make selections and put, you know, arms and legs into their own polygroup and all that good stuff. And another thing I can tell you about, this is another 2023 previous release, is if you go over here to your UV section, you can actually use creased edges as your UV cuts. So UV map, crease seams. You can go through there and do that. So anyway, we have this object here. It's got UVs. So we can say copy these UVs and then go back to our working model here. And then we can say paste UVs. And now we have UVs and high-res geometry. Hooray! But for performance purposes, I don't want UVs. So I'm going to go down here to UV map and I'm going to say delete UV, because that basically, it more than doubles my effective memory footprint for my polygons. So what were we talking about? Oh yeah, we have this and we have proxy pose, and we were going to, oh, so for miniatures, and this, you know what, I want to do this on my other thing I printed. So one cool thing you can do, or one thing to keep in mind, I suppose, is let's say we want to go into proxy pose. And you know what? Is the same true for, so here's sub D level 1. Let's do a test. I'm going to go through here and I'm going to say mask this arm. Let's get rid of that base. I'm just gonna see. So if we take a piece of geometry, and I'm going to control tap to give that a nice feather, and control tap to invert that. And we're going to go through here and I'm going to scale. We're going to give him some little T-Rex arms. Let's turn on dynamic and turn the dynamic off so it's not gizmo based. And we're going to shrink his arms down. And then I'm going to go to his leg here. So I've never actually noticed this because I've never done any major proportional changes, but so we got our envelope here, and I've gone through and I've made some big proportional changes with our details, with our low res envelope, and then I'm going to go up here to subdivision level 3. Yeah, okay. So you can see when we moved this, when we made this geometry smaller, it has more pronounced detail, and then when we made this proportionally larger, since it's over a larger surface area, the detail looks a little softer. But I want to say in proxy pose it's even more pronounced. Let's see. So for example, instead of using our subdivision history, we're just going to hop right here into proxy pose. 0.5 is fine. Oh, here's your keep details. If you crank this up, it gathers decimated geometry around, again, those big angle changes. I haven't really found much of a use for it, but it's there if you need it. Same thing with polish. So we'll head into proxy pose here. So now with proxy pose, if I go through and I say, okay, let's make this arm bigger. are smaller. And again, dynamics on, so we can scale on their local axis. And in here, I'm just doing a quick test here, sorry. Hop out of proxy pose. Yeah, I think it's more pronounced with proxy pose. So when you're taking the envelope and putting it into a smaller space, the details that reappear are going to be more pronounced. And then again, yeah, it is more pronounced. And then with proxy pose, I should say. And then, you know, as the details get spread out over a larger surface area, it gets softer. So let's use that to our advantage for miniatures. So when we shrink this down, he's not super detailed. Let me just undo out of this state, sorry. You know, like from back here, he's pretty detailed, but again, you got to remember, like if I'm going to be seeing this guy on my desktop or my tabletop, you know, I'm going to be seeing him from here, and that's about as detailed as I need him, right? However, if I'm going to be holding it up to my eyeball, you know, maybe it'll end up looking like this, and you'll see it's not really that detailed. But what we can do is if we want to, since we're going to be printing at such a small scale, we want to make sure whatever detail we have on here is more pronounced than we maybe think it should be. Another thing too is distribution of detail. You know, if I was really sculpting at scale, I'd probably pay more attention to like how many, maybe I'd decrease the number of little steps on his tail here and these bumps here and the wrinkles, just so I can have fewer wrinkles but more pronounced wrinkles that'll read better again as a tiny little object. But I'm not that smart right now, so we're just gonna keep rolling with what we got. So now let's do a test. I'm gonna take this object here, I'm gonna say go into geometry proxy pose, and I'm just gonna do a uniform scale. So I'm gonna go out of X symmetry, go to unmatched mask center, turn X back on, and we're just gonna scale the entire thing down quite a bit, and then we're gonna hop out of proxy pose, and that'll over crank my detail. So now I've got more contrasting details. They might be saying, well, of course, Mike, but you can also go down here to deformation, and there is a deformation contrast. So you can crank that up, and that'll also over crank your detail. There's also contrast brushes, B, C, O, 0 and 1, contrast delta and contrast target. Contrast delta is basically, I think you can just keep brushing on the same area and it'll just getting more and more contrasty. Contrast target goes to a specified intensity amount, I believe. So now we can just go through here, and if you want to enhance any areas, you can go through and just kind of use this brush to kind of pump up the jam in a few areas, a few key areas here to make sure that it really reads nicely. So anyway, a couple different ways and methods you could do to increase that. And then of course, I want to scale him back up just at the high res. And so now we've got more detail, more contrast, and now we want to pose. We can pose in subdivision level 1 because we have it. If we didn't have that, no problem, because again, we can go in here to proxy pose. Anyway, let me get a drink. Oh my gosh, I'll get cut up. Let's see. Whew. Scaling everything. This person is out of scale, out of prime. We know how to solve this. Yeah. So ZBrush scale. It's basically right here under Scale Master. ZBrush scale is it's a generic scale. It's a unit scale, and specifically, it's a millimeter scale. So if you're modeling in centimeters in another program and you bring it into ZBrush, when you bring it into ZBrush, it's going to read that as a generic unit. So all you got to do is say set scene scale and switch it from millimeters to centimeters, and that'll go ahead and update it. Well, that's just for measuring in ZBrush. If you're importing things into ZBrush, all it's going to do is go in here and change this export setting. So when you bring things into ZBrush, it makes things generally compatible with ZBrush's tools, and then it'll just change your export scale size over here. So you shouldn't really, I mean, it's historically sometimes maybe I would have had problems with scale in ZBrush, but it's been a long time since I have. Yeah, so just importing something in the ZBrush should maintain the scale when you export it, unless you're doing something weird with scaling because this is really just for setting your unit scale if you want to measure stuff inside of ZBrush. If you don't want to, then just importing into ZBrush should maintain your scale. That's how I get things. So for example, if I want to scale this guy and take him into Marvelous Designer, what I would do is go in and grab like the Marvelous Designer male avatar, and then I would say append my guy here. So he's at this unit scale. I'm going to say just do a deformation unify, and that'll just kind of fit him here. And then he's now at the millimeter size for the Marvelous Designer. And if I go down here to export, you can see these export scale numbers have been modified. So if I really want to play it safe, same thing with CAD modeling. If I want to really play it safe, I'll go into like Fusion 360 or whatever and make a 32 millimeter disc and then bring that in, and then, or a unit scale I can measure to. That's probably safe as well. But it should maintain those sizes, I think. Cool. The patch release date for this, I think they released it, I want to say Friday. Cool. Oh, thank you, Sam. 2023, you get to auto fill a mask outline you have painted now. Do you have demonstrating that? Yes, I do. So anytime, generally speaking, there's one caveat to this. For example, if I go in here to my playlists here, there is a ZBrush. So ZBrush 2022, 2021, 2020, what's new? So here's a ZBrush 2023, what's new? If I go into full playlists, there should be a, somewhere in here is like a masking, or there's the mask region. So if you want to see the new stuff, you can go in here and you can check that out. But that is super powerful, by the way. So if I go through here and I say, hey, I want to mask pen, you're going through here and making a very careful mask selection. It's like, okay, I want this perfectly masked here. Oh, now I got to go through here and brush this. Not anymore. All you got to do is go down to your masking menu, and there is now a mask region. So you can go in here and you can say, actually, this is cool too. So you can say, I've got a bunch of different spots in here, but this one I want to just be an outline, and these two I want to fill in. Well, you can say, if you do auto region, it'll go through and auto fill it for you. If you go and say analyze region, and then you're like, I want to mask this one fully and this one fully, and then you can say fill region, it'll know which ones you want to fill. So that's a really cool thing. Cool, I'm doing well, thank you, Christian. Cool. Awesome. So let's pose this guy out. So here's this classic, kind of a classic pose, but we'll have a little bit of fun with it. So instead of going in here to subdivision level 1 and posing, I'm just going to hop right into proxy pose. Honestly, because my subdivision level 1, it's lower res, but it's not really that low res, you know. So I can do, this is kind of mid-level. This is almost like secondary form posing if I was to do this. But the reason I didn't go any lower than this is because we'd start getting projection errors. So if I did zero mesh half, these teeth would start getting really nubby, and then when I went to project my detail back, I'd have to go in and fix a bunch of projection errors essentially. So to avoid that, I just didn't do it because I didn't feel like doing it. However, I can now use that to my advantage. I can have a low res proxy, as well as I can go in here and say proxy pose and do a really low res proxy for major volume changes. So basically just posing my primary forms. Oh yeah, and also this is even cooler. So because this is just an organic model, and it's just, honestly, it's just one piece, so it's even easier. Let's do this. Let's say append a Z-sphere. I'm gonna grab a Z-sphere here. We're gonna go X symmetry E. To scale this down, we'll go in here to transparent. We'll move this up into the hips, and then we'll say Q, and I'm gonna drag this out. So we're gonna just make some Z-sphere chains in here. I don't need the base in here. So again, Q, if you wanna make it the same size, hold down Shift and it'll snap to the previous size. Make your draw size really small. If it's really a big draw size and you're trying to move stuff around, it's gonna move everything. So a really small draw size, W, we're gonna go here to the toe, hit Q, and then we'll just drag back. So I'm hitting Q to, oops, and then Q to put another joint in the chain here, and then W to move it. There we go. And then generally speaking, just like if you're doing rigging in another program, you would probably want to have this generally center mass. There's always caveats to every rule, but I think that would work best in this case here. So we're just kind of moving everything, all these little bone positions into center mass here. Let's go ahead and make this so we can see a little bit better for you on the video. And then right down the middle, we're just going to hit Q and then make this, and then W. He's got kind of special proportions here, so we're just going to move this back. So here's kind of his neck and kind of his chest and kind of his spine in here. So I'm just doing a very general-ish spine here. And then to go to his head here, let's hit W, and we'll just put, basically wherever we're putting these Z-spheres, that's going to be an area of influence. So when I go to rotate these, anything in this radius is going to, any of these associated verts will move along with this. It'll make more sense when I do it. Let's go ahead and add some jaw control. So right down the middle again. I'm just going to drag off of this, and we're also setting up a hierarchy. So here is our original Z-sphere, and then everything here is all the joints we're drawing after this is a child of that parent. So if I go through here and I rotate this, all the children will follow. And that's really useful if you want to move stuff around. So as opposed to masking and gizmo and transpose master and stuff, which is totally useful, in this case it might be a little bit funner. So let's find the top of the, basically the top of the rib cage here, and I'm gonna go put in, let's put in a clavicle control. So we'll kind of put in, boy, he's got some special geometry, or some anatomy I should say, and then clavicle, and then back here to a shoulder joint here, and then again all the way down we'll go to the wrist here. Yeah, Q, W. All right, so we've got our little bones in place, and you know, he's only got 3 fingers, so let's do this. One thing I noticed when I was making my video, I do want an overall wrist control so I can kind of do this kind of thing with my wrist and have my, you know, hands follow, but I need an extra joint here in order to do that, and then I can have my other finger joints coming from there, and so I can rotate these manually. Now you may be saying, well, hey, you're not holding down shift to make these all the same size. It's not a big deal. You can always at any time go in here to stroke curves helper and say scale Z spheres to draw size, and then I'll go ahead and let's make these a little bigger. Make your draw size whatever size, and then scale them to whatever uniform size you want. So no biggie. So again, small brush size, go in here to our knuckles, and again, just to make this a little bit faster, I guess the claws aren't really going to bend, huh? So we'll just stop this here. That should be about right. We got a knuckle joint, and then on this one too, we're going to go to the very end, and then hit Q, and then W to move it into place. And if you want to, I think if you turn off Ghost, and then you go through here and you draw, for example, it'll actually snap to the surface of the mesh. So you can just go through here and hit Q, and then hit Q. So if that's any easier for you, go for it. And then this pinky, that's whatever. All right, all right. Okay, so now we've got our skeleton. Oh, we gotta need a tail, because we want to pose this tail out. And we also, the other bad thing about this too is if we didn't have the tail, if we move the leg, these influences over here would grab half his tail. These influences over here would grab half his tail, so his tail would just kind of split or get fatter following the legs, which we don't want. So we're going to put new influences for the tail to follow, and that's literally just putting in joints or bones or Z-spheres in the case of ZBrush. So we're going to hit Q and then W, Q and W, and then depending on the fidelity of the joint chain is going to be how the fidelity of the tail wiggle that you want to do. I think that'll be okay. Now I already know I'm going to have some problems with this, but let's talk about that. So if I go in here to my Rancor, we have this mesh and we have proxy pose. So this, again, we can't go through and change any of this geometry, because this geometry, just like a sub D level 1 within its relationship with a sub D level 4, you can't make changes to sub D level 1 and still maintain that relationship. The vert order cannot change. So if I was to go through here and say, hey, I want to slice through here and make some new geometry, I go in here with my Z-modeler brush and insert an edge loop or something, I can't, because that vert order has to be maintained in order to maintain that relationship with the high res. But there's ways around that in subdivision history. If you go to that video I linked earlier, you can freeze subdivisions, or you can use Go Z, or you can modify the low res and then reproject your details back to the high res, which is essentially what freeze subdivision is doing. But we'll ignore that for now. So here we have proxy pose. However, I want to use my Z-spheres for this. So if I go down to my Z-sphere and I'm like, okay, let me grab that proxy pose. So Z-spheres, rigging, select my mesh. I can't see it. I have an old mesh sitting out here that we were using for, this is our clone for our UVs, but we don't have our proxy pose. So I'm going to go up here to our proxy pose mesh. I'm going to say make polymesh 3D. That'll just make a duplicate out here. It's not a proxy pose, it's just the geometry. But most importantly, this vert order did not change. So now what I can do is then go back to this subtool stack, go to my Z sphere. We can say rigging, select mesh, there it is. We can grab that mesh. So now let's go ahead and turn off our original proxy pose mesh. So now we have our Z-sphere rig associated with this geometry. So if we go in here to bind mesh, now we can go through here and we can hit R for rotate. And that's probably like an FK solution. You can go through here and just kind of rotate your joints around. It will let you, if you want to, you can hit W and you can grab individual joints if you want to do major proportional changes. If you hit W and move the bone, that'll actually move the child-parent relationships. That's actually not too terrible to use. It actually does a really cool, again, just kind of it's moving down the joint chain, so that's okay. E is scale. That's going to do major proportional changes here. So again, might be iffy. So we'll just stick to rotates for now. So rotating my arms up, you're going to see it's going to grab a lot of his lats, and if I move his chest in here, there's not a lot of volume preservation or control that we have in here. If we move his leg up, his tail's not going to follow, but his butt kind of just loses all of its volume there. So if we want to fix that, we can go out of bind mesh here, and essentially what we need to do is add more influences. So let's hit Q to go back into draw mode. And again, these are child-parent relationships. So the parent of the rib cage volume preservation that I want to create is our spine. So again, if I want to preserve our rib cage a little bit, I'm going to come off the spine here. And in fact, I can even put, here's a Z-sphere back here to kind of preserve his lats, so his arm will move with this Z-sphere. And in fact, I can even go in here and reposition if I want. So this, and don't worry about the scale. It's about the position of the Z-spheres, not the scale that's going to affect the influence, I don't believe. But anyway, here's my lat influence that I want to have, and then here is my rib cage influence, and I'm going to use these to preserve volume. And actually, you can use these as sculpting tools if you want to. Sorry, this is getting a little abstract, but it'll make more sense when I start moving stuff around. So here we'll use this for belly preservation. We'll use one back here for butt preservation. And again, it's kind of a sculpting tool. So now this will follow. If I go through here and I rotate this joint, you're going to see this is a child of this, so it'll follow it along. It'll also influence this area, and everybody's happy. So yay. Okay, so now we'll bind our mesh again, and then we'll do another test. So now when I rotate, it's not going to pull his lats along because his lats are over here, but now when I go through and rotate his chest back and back, all of these children, all of these influences will pull that geometry back along with it and allow those volumes to kind of do their job. Other cool thing is if I rotate this leg forward, you're going to see the butt kind of, in this case, when I rotate the leg, this kind of stays back with the hips, because it's really a child of the hips more than it is the lower upper leg. But we can go through here, and if I need to, I can hit W in this case and then just grab this one, and I can use this to kind of dictate where this geometry needs to go in order to kind of, have the volume where I need it. So instead of going here and sculpting, you can just use this to kind of put things into place. Let's go out of bind mesh to go back to our bind pose. So I think this will work okay. Let's go back into bind. One thing I do want to check though is that neck. I didn't leave a whole lot of neck control in here. So if I want to rotate his head down, it'll rotate his head, but it's actually going to close his mouth because I have a control here for his lower jaw. So let's fix that. I'm going to move, let's go out of bind mesh. W, I'm going to move this forward here. I'm going to hit Q and give myself just a little bit of neck rotation control right in here. Okay. Now, bind mesh. Now, rotate. I can look up, I can look down, and then I can... Cool. Oh, another thing too is we're talking about, the wrist is a good example of this. We can go through and we can rotate our wrists. You know, I'm grabbing the bone in between and I can just kind of rotate our wrist down. However, I can also go grab the individual joint and I can rotate down the long axis and kind of twist. Look at that. That's a nice twist. And if you want, you can actually go in here. This is kind of a rigging thing too. You can put a little twist bone in here. So when you go and rotate, you have a, oops. Go out of bind mesh if you're making changes, right? Q, and then bind your mesh again. And then now you can go through here and you can have a little more forearm or twist control. So instead of going in here and making like an ulna and a radius and having bones overlap, you can just put a little extra twist control down the axis in this direction to give you a little more twisty influence in that area. Does that all make sense? When making character for games, in order to retope the armpit and shoulder, you need to A-pose your character. But when I use the rig to bring the arms down, the shoulders look weird. What can I do to avoid? Yeah, so basically, traditional T-pose. This is for rigging to kind of put everything on a single axis. You know, your hands will be all flat, and then your legs, you know, or I'm not going to do it, but everything will basically be perfectly flat, and that's your T-pose, and that's basically ensuring that all of your bones are on the same plane because it makes math easier. And probably makes things more predictable when it comes to all the little math things that go into rigs. I'm not a rigging person. I just pretend to be one. So that would be like my T-pose, right? The problem with T-poses is, generally speaking, you know, when you're just kind of, depending on the game you're making and the characters, but if you're not making like a Spider-Man game and you're just making like Red Dead Redemption or a Grand Theft Auto where people are just generally walking around 99% of the time, it's probably safer to, you know, you don't need this kind of, the safest range of motion or the most predictable or obvious range of motion that your character is going to have is a nice relaxed pose. So that's where we get the A pose. So it's, again, you're generally just going to be standing around walking, just kind of walking along, right? So and also another good reason to have the A pose is when you do your cloth. If you want to like put clothing on something, for cloth simulation, a T pose is fine because it's going to simulate the cloth as your body moves. But for like putting armor or clothing on a character, you need a little space in the armpits. And in fact, I would even say this A pose probably should be more like this, just to put a little more room in those armpits, like you were saying, so you can get, you know, geometry in there. What was the question? A pose your character. When I use the rig to bring the arms down, the shoulders look weird. Yes. So in order to avoid that, what I would do is I suppose model in an A pose and then use T pose to snap to your T pose. And I really don't care what the shoulders look like in the T pose. But the A pose, oh sorry, I blocked everything out. Thanks. Sorry, coffee delivery. So what I would do is basically I would model in this pose, and then when it snaps to the T pose for my rigging purposes, then I really don't care what the shoulders look like, but this will give you the most neutral-ish pose for your body, so you can go through there and then retopologize. Although if we're talking about retopologizing for a pose, what you might consider, I don't know how common this would be anymore, but doing an extreme pose. Like, what's the most extreme pose your character is going to be in, and then retopologize to that, because then you know when you hit your extremes, you'll have all the geometry you need. You're not guessing, you know, because if you do a neutral topology pose, and then you go in later, you know, 3 months later, go and do a really extreme pose, you're going to be like, oh crap, I got to add a ton of edge loops to hit this extreme pose. So, you know, you might back yourself in a corner there. I don't know how often that really comes up. It doesn't really come up that much in video games, but yes, animating with ZBrush. Proxy pose work with one subtool at a time. Yes, but you can proxy pose multiple subtools if you want. So like if you wanted to, and we did this in the videos too, if you're just joining us. ZBrush 2023, what's new? These last couple videos here. Oh, wait. We're missing one. Give me a sec. Transpose master with Z-sphere rigging. Project history. Edit video. This one needs to go to ZBrush 2023. What's new? Done. Save. Okay. So down here, transpose master. That's a refresher. Transpose master with Z-sphere rigging. I talk about it. You know what? I talk about it in all of these, but essentially you would just proxy pose every subtool that gives you your low res proxy. Then you can throw it in the transpose master and do that. So anyway, here's a copy, paste. Oh, you know what? I haven't done the redshift stuff yet. I had when I do the redshift, the background disappears, and I was recording, and I was like, I found a workaround that you could actually go in here to the projects. It wasn't even demo projects. It was this RS demo test. I could pull this project in, reload my project into that project. My background would show up, but then eventually it would, by background, I mean light background. This background would disappear randomly, and I just never went back and recorded it, so I apologize for that. I'll get back around to it. Well, thank you, Pink Art. Glad the videos are helping. Can we customize the spacebar menu? I don't think so. Not that I know of. You'd have to be way smarter than me. Like a Joseph Drest type could maybe go in and find the deep code to change that, but I have no idea how to do it. You can make a custom menu. That's what I use here. So this is all my custom menu stuff. You see a lot of stuff is missing because we're playing with Z-sphere, so it's a contextually sensitive menu. So going here to Z-spheres, all my Z-sphere stuff is here, but this stuff isn't. But yeah, you can make your own custom menu assigned to a hotkey. If you want more help with that, that is on this intro to ZBrush here. And then if you go in here, there's like custom menu, custom interface. So if you want, like, if you're new to ZBrush, you don't have any idea what I'm doing, go through this playlist first, as well as on my ArtStation page. Here's all the what's new. So intro, 2022, 2017, blah, 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 all the way down to 4R8. And they have some extra goodies in there too. I don't know that it's really that useful as far as, like, I don't know, what was some of them? Was it this one? You know what? I guess they're all in there. Oh yeah, I sometimes I'll throw my live streams from there and there, but here's where the playlist is. You can go through all the new. Boy, 2021 was a monster release, wasn't it? Oh, also, speaking of the ability to have a low-res proxy pose that you can use to go through and pose your object, because you have a low-res mesh, you could now use that on with cloth dynamics. So we'll maybe do that in a second. So now here's the really hard part. Is what pose are we making? Here's the classic. So when you're posing stuff, you generally, and I'm not an animator by any stretch of the imagination, I went to Ringling, and then I promptly didn't animate for 20 years after that. So we're going to turn off X symmetry here, and we're going to hit R to go into rotate mode. And you know, generally we're going to want to start from your core. So we're going to go through here. Oh man. Down the bone here. X, rotate. Yeah, I guess that's our main our main one there. So if I want to kind of lean him over here, like he's, you know, stumbling out of a cave and there's like a little guy standing over here, he could be looking at him, and then we can rotate the head over there in that direction. Again, if I want to rotate on that axis, I can grab just the joint, and that'll allow me to kind of rotate this entire section here. Again, if I want to preserve volume, I could just have little strands going from this, or bones from here, this parent to this child. But in this case, I could also go back in here with my sculpt brush, or just move brush and move those back into place if I want. So here we go. And again, we're just kind of rotating down here so we can give him a little menacing look here. And if I want to close his mouth, I can just rotate this back up, you know, so it kind of depends on what you're going for. I'm going to say open. Let's open his mouth a little bit. So he's yelling about something. So he's looking down in this direction, and maybe he needs to like give himself a little bit more of a stable thing because he's actually scared because he's stepping on he doesn't want to step on a mouse, or maybe he does want to step on something. He actually looks, this is kind of looks scared to me for some reason. So let's rotate down the axis here. And we'll just keep lifting his leg up here. And when these guys are moving around, even in the Book of Boba Fett, they didn't, I don't know, they weren't like ultra dynamic. They weren't like parkouring around. They were kind of lumbering giants, right? So I don't want to get too crazy with his pose because it'd be a little bit out of character. And in fact, even this is kind of pushing it for me as far as like how far you would ever see a Rancor lift his leg up. And then this, I don't know. I don't really know what we're making, but we go ahead and, so here we have shoulder and clavicle control. So I can go through here and I can kind of pull that whole shoulder and scapula, basically the shoulder girdle back. And then I have a little bit more control with just the shoulder here, and then obviously the arm. And again, always remember you can bring in little child helpers in here if you'd like. But and yeah, we are getting a little bit pinched here a little bit. So let's go ahead and pull this down. So clavicle up, shoulder down, and then shoulder back, and then arm back here. We'll bring this wrist in here, and then the fingers out. So we'll say, yeah, give us a nice little, oh, and if you want, also I'd turn this off, but maybe if it's a better artist, I'd leave it on. So here's our thumbnail here. So you can use this. If you want to see your geometry, because right now we're just seeing our Z-spheres, you can hit A on your keyboard. However, go in here to Adaptive Skin, make your density down to 1, Dynamesh resolution down to 0. If your Dynamesh resolution is up, it's just going to Dynamesh resulting adaptive skin preview, and then your density is just going to subdivide it, which we don't need. So if I want to see my proxy pose geometry, just hit A on your keyboard, and then you can see your silhouette update. So there you go. And then this one here, just really quick. Again, this will be fun to print, I suppose. But again, yeah, you know what? I think it should be fine. So here, and we'll go ahead and maybe rotate this arm in a little bit and up. All right, so he sees something down here he either wants to kill or he's really afraid of. I'm getting more of a fear vibe from this. Maybe he wants to turn his foot in so he doesn't step on. I'm gonna model a little mouse and put it down there. So now we have our scaredy cat Rancor here, and just because again, if you hit the A key, you know, we want to keep that silhouette nice and clear here. So maybe we'll move the hand up so we can read that here, and then finger poses are the funnest. And now because we have the hands are so simple, it was pretty easy to go through here and kind of just rig these fingers so we can go through here and make pretty easy changes. Pretty easy. All right, so we've got our pose here. Let's bring his leg in just a little bit more. All right, so if we're done playing around with this, all we have to do is hit again A for our adaptive skin, and this skin has the exact same vert order as our proxy pose. Now this is cool. So if I go here, you know what, if I ever want to go back and do another pose, what I might actually end up doing is I'm going to duplicate this off. So this is a duplicate that has proxy pose turned on. I'm going to go back to my original here, go into solo mode. I'm going to just undo back to where I just have my base Rancor. I just like having that around just in case. Here's my duplicate of that has the vert order of this pose right here. So if I want to snap these verts to where these verts are, and again, these verts have a relationship with the original high res, all I got to do is go in here, I hope, go in here to proxy pose, overwrite pose, and then you can choose which one of your subtools you want to overwrite with. These are grayed out because they're not the same vertex order, but this one isn't. So you can go boop, touch it. And then now if we hop out of proxy pose, our high res Dynamesh or our high res geometry from our subdivision history will snap back, and now we have our new Rancor. And then at this point, because I have subdivision history, instead of going through here and trying to do correctives on like a 500,000 polygon Dynamesh, I actually have subdivision history. So in conjunction with ProxyPose doing a really nice low res envelope, I can go through here and use kind of like a medium res envelope with my subdivision level 1 for my character, and go in here and just kind of, you know, sculpt basically correctives at this point. Let's turn off X symmetry because he's no longer symmetrical, and then I can go through here and we'll use our move brush and just kind of help out, you know, where I didn't have the little helper joints and stuff to preserve volume and stuff. I can just go through here and just kind of modify this just a bit. So here, it's all fine. We'll move this leg out, this foot in a little bit. Oh, I forgot to pose the tail at all. Well, here's an alternative. So if I hit W and then the control drag down the body, it'll follow the geometry. Some geometry better than others depending on how it's set up, and this is all just purely ZBrush, so it might be having a hard time finding loops, but you can just control drag down the geo. If it's not doing it for you, just go in here to mask lasso, mask here. Here's a trick. So because we're on low res geometry, if I was on high res geometry and I mask through here and I'm like, I want to blur this mask, control tap to blur it, or masking, blur mask, you'll be hitting it all day and it's barely going to blur out at all. The obvious solution is, the way we have this set up, is go down to subdivision level 1. Less geometry means, number one, a bigger gradient between geo and easier feathering. So if you just go through here and blur, now you have a very nice feathered piece of geometry. However, if you're in a bind, you can go through here and you can actually back out with your mask lasso brush. So just back your camera off, and the further away your camera is, the more blurry that line will be. So you can actually, on a high res piece of geometry, you can have blurred geometry on high res geo. Just making sure okay, that's good. So we got that. Oh yeah, so we're talking about posing. So in this instance, what I would do, you could also hop back into ProxyPose if you want to, you know. But since we do have subdivision level 1, I think it's easy enough just to go through here and say, you know what, let me just, so his tail, if he's, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna actually push this a little bit more. It's a little bit lame. Now that I see it, I'm gonna kind of lean this over a bit, and not saying this is any masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, but you know what I mean. So here, if he's leaning this way, and then maybe his tail will, I don't know, help balance him out. So we'll try both ways. That's easy enough to do, right? So I'm gonna go through here and I'm gonna mask the tail, control tap to blur that mask, control tap to invert. Actually, don't even do that. Go here, hold down control alt. That will unmask everything but the tail. Control tap to invert, save you a button press. And then we'll just kind of position this. Oh, we can also talk about transpose lines. So in here, we're using the gizmo. So essentially, if we hold down Alt and tap, that'll find the surface normal, and then you can just hold down Alt, which goes into unlock mode. You can just set the pivot point for the gizmo, and then you can let go of Alt, and then you can go through here and kind of rotate. So if I go through and kind of rotate this, Control tap, bring this down, rotate a little bit more, Control tap, and I'm just using the camera-based rotation here, and then control tap, and just again moving the pivots here so I can just go through and just kind of rotate this back around. And in this case too, you could also probably get away with going through here, oops, just masking and inverting, and just protecting all the other verts, and just going through here and just using your move brush. That's also totally fine. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm not in love with the silhouette of the tail in the background, but whatever. It's not like we're only going to see the model from this. It's another thing to keep in mind too, is when we're evaluating silhouettes, it's fine for when you're just doing like basic character stuff, and it's like, okay, this character will read because of this silhouette, blah blah blah. But in reality, when it's running around a level in context, and you know, you're seeing it from, you know, a top down 3/4 dungeon crawler view or an over the shoulder, you know, always remember in reality where this is going to be seen from, the player point of view as an enemy AI or as the player character. Evaluating something out of context in a vacuum just purely based on the silhouette value, like in ZBrush, it can be a little bit misleading. So okay, so we got this guy here, and what else? I think, oh yeah, any other major correctives we need to correct here? Anything that got a little noodly or bendy. That's the other thing too, is that you would either need a lot of little child helper joints to go through there, or you can just manually go through and just, as your muscles are changing, you know, so as you're bending your arm, you just go through here and just kind of flex muscles or give them volume as needed so that it makes more sense for the pose that you're doing. But okay, oh yeah, I have coffee. It's like, man, I'm starting to go. Bring me back. Dynamic symmetry video. What would dynamic symmetry be again? I forget. Oh yes, I did. You know what? I did do a dynamic symmetry video, but there is one caveat to it. When I released the video, it's the very first video in this playlist here. It's this one here, quick dynamic symmetry. However, make sure you read the description, because right when I released this video, or soon after, they put in this little dynamic word. So essentially what that means, so basically you could get symmetry back. So if we go back to this one here, we have X symmetry. This is world symmetry. So basically, if I go here, it's kind of like when we were doing the arms. If I hit W and then control drag down the body, and then I want to scale these arms and I have symmetry off, here it's going to scale towards the world axis and away from the world axis. Not great. I want to scale in the local axis. Well, if I turn on symmetry here and dynamics turned on, dynamic means I'm looking at the gizmo to determine my axis of symmetry. So now my Z is this way. It's almost like in Modo, you have an arbitrary work plane that you can set. That's essentially what this is doing, is giving you a new axis of symmetry based on your gizmo position. Very, very useful, but in this case, not that useful. You know, if I want to just, you know, now the gizmo is the center, and now it's doing that, which is exactly what it's supposed to be doing. To get my old local symmetry across, so it's basically world axis symmetry, but local, if that makes sense. Turn off that little dynamic word, and now you're back to your original dynamic functionality, dynamic symmetry functionality, if that makes sense. Yes, rig with Z-spheres, that's exactly right. Nice, cool. Excellent. Yeah, we'll talk about, you know what, we'll talk about Transpose Master next. Why not? We'll do that with our cool Ninja Turtle. Scroll down. So I can create a new menu and set the spacebar as a hotkey, right? Maybe not. I'm afraid to try it, but you can try it. You can hold down Control-Alt and then tap any menu or any button in ZBrush, and then let's try it. Okay, Control-Alt, tap, spacebar. Hey, kind of. You get my custom menu along with the spacebar menu. So what you could do is you could figure out how much filler you need for your custom menu, and then you can have a continuation of the spacebar menu down here. That's probably not the answer you're looking for, but kind of. Proxy pose on an imported sculpt from another C4D. Use proxy pose. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Proxy pose literally just takes whatever your mesh is and then decimates it down to a low-res envelope that has an association with the original high-res. So absolutely, yes, you could. Now, as far as go-zing back and forth, yes, if you had a proxy pose in ZBrush and you wanted to take it into so have a proxy pose, take it into another program like, Cinema 4D in this case, and then maybe use a rig system to pose the proxy pose and then send that back. Absolutely. As long as you don't change the vertex order, it'll update the vertex position to your original proxy pose in ZBrush. It'll still have that relationship with the original high-res. You'll be good to go. So absolutely, yes. Oh, thank you, Benjamin. Glad the videos helped. Cool. Yeah, I'll be here Thursday. We'll figure out something else we want to do. Yeah, that menu is a little messy. So the subscription, not the perpetual license. I think you can get, I don't know exactly the licensing terms, but like I think if you buy the perpetual for 2023, you get 2023 perpetually, but then when 2024 comes out, maybe not, you know. But the subscription is probably the easiest way to stay up to date. Cool, cool. Okay, so now we were doing this. I'm trying to remember what I was doing. Okay, so we want to print this as a mini. So all of the high-res stuff has come along. I could go through here and clean all of this stuff up. But let's talk about that base. So let's turn our base back on and go into solo mode here. I'm going to turn off this proxy pose. So we could keep posing in here, by the way, too. So this is just our adaptive skin. So if I hit A to go out of adaptive skin, here's our Z-sphere rig, and then we got to go back down here to rigging. And wait, where is it at? Can I do this? What did I do? Rigging, bind mesh. Select mesh. Oh, I'm in solo mode. Yeah, I guess don't be in solo mode. It's not a huge deal. I mean, I lost my original pose, but you know, it is easy to go back. So here I am back in my bind pose, and now I can do more poses. So if I wanted to do like a whole army of Rancor, I could easily go through here and do, you know, a bunch of different poses here. Just to make sure that you understood that. So let's go back here to our high res. So we've got this one here, and we've got our base. So now this is our generic base cylinder. So if I wanted to do an army with different poses, for example, I could have this one here. I'm going to make his foot match that base a little bit better. So again, we'll hop back down to subdivision level 1, blur that out, set our gizmo. Oh, that was another thing I was going to talk about. So for example, if I want to go through here and pose this arm, I can go through and like mask, you know, to the elbow, control tap to invert that, or like we talked about before, control alt drag over the arm here, and then control tap W, set the gizmo where I want to bend, like it's a joint inside the body, right? And then we can go through here and we can bend. However, you're going to see, number one, you're going to lose some volume here. You got to position this really carefully, and you're going to lose volume. An alternative to that is if you want to go, but it's not that bad. You just basically, you know, go through, bend the arm, and then just keep working your way down the chain. I want to bend the wrist, move it down here to bend the wrist, set the joint position, bend the wrist. So it's not the end of the world. An alternative is you'll go a little bit higher. So I'm going to go all the way up to the shoulder here. Control tap to blur that. Really, all we're doing is protecting these verts. We're going to hit W and then Y. And then we're going to go, for example, if I want to bend at the elbow, instead of going from the elbow down with the transpose line and then rotating here, like rotating along an axis, like here's my anchor point, here's my end point, moving these into the bone positions and then rotating like this, which is totally viable too. You can do that. An alternative is to go, I'm going to go from shoulder down to elbow, set the bone positions by grabbing the outer rings. And then if I hold down, I'm in rotate mode. In gizmo mode, doesn't matter what you hit. You're just going to have move scale and rotate unless you've done something fancy to separate those out. In transpose mode, you definitely need to hit R because we want to be in rotate mode. And then we can hold down Alt. And as we're bending, you're going to see it's going to give you a little bit more, it's going to point that elbow and give you a little more volume preservation in the arm here. So that's another alternative if you want to use transpose lines for posing. Maybe you can use that to your advantage. Anyway, so we've got this here, we've got our foot, we've got our base here, and this is going to be our swappable base. So we're going to say duplicate this off because I want to keep these nice and safe. So I'm going to hold down Shift and shoot this to the bottom, tap this one, Shift, shoot at the bottom, turn these off, and this is going to be our working base. So I'm going to go ahead and say dynamic is turned on, which is totally fine. We've got our Rancor here, so let's go ahead and do some Boolean work here. So on this, with this base selected, I'm going to go in here to my custom menu, but I'm just going to, it's basically just a cube. Yeah, just a cube. And then we're going to go in here to transparency mode with ghost turned off because we still want to snap to, we'll turn ghost on because we don't want to snap to our Rancor foot. I'm just going to drag a cube onto this little, this base here. Now, problem, Actually, I can just poke all the way through, can't I? This might be semi-problematic. Anyway, so this is actually round. If I go through here and say split mask points and then do Shift D, you'll see, oh, there's my cube. All it had was dynamic turned on. So if you remember, geometry, dynamic subdivision is turned on, and when you turn it on for a cube, it's just going to average the verts down as it subdivides. So that's what the reason you're getting that shape. But now I go in here to move mode. We'll turn gizmo mode back on. So now I can move this down, and we can use this as a way to create a key at the bottom of the foot that will be attached to the foot. And I'm going to scale this in so it doesn't poke all the way through the base here. And then we don't, in this case, we don't want to have an object that goes straight down in. We want it to have kind of a little bit of a taper so it lifts out a little bit easier. So in that case, what I'm going to do is hold down Control Alt and drag over these bottom verts here. We could even go to Unmesh Mesh Center, and you can hold down Alt and scale in these two axes and just pull this in a little bit. Make sense? So now we have, for the bottom of this foot, we're going to have a little wedge that comes out of the foot and goes into a wedge that's going to be punched into this, so it'll go, bloop, it'll fit right in there. So we've got that going, which is nice. So now what we need to do, we have our wedge for the bottom of our foot. And then now we need to go through here. I'm going to duplicate this off, and this is going to be a Boolean for our base. So I'm going to put it one below. I'm going to set it to subtractive. I'm going to turn off everything except for these two objects, and I'm going to go in here to live Boolean mode, and then turn off transparency, turn off LSM. So now we have, again, our bottom of our foot has this shape in it, and then I've copied that shape and I've cut it out of our other shape. So hopefully these two shapes will be compatible. However, one thing to keep in mind is tolerances. When you're 3D printing this, and again, we're printing small, and so this is like, if this is 32 millimeters across, we're talking like just a few millimeters, not that many millimeters for this shape here. So printing this small, we're probably going to have to make the bottom foot, either make this a little bigger than the one that's on the bottom of the foot, or the bottom of the foot one a little smaller than this one. So for instance, we can go back here to this shape here. I'm going to hit W, Alt Tap, and then I'm just going to go through and say, no, let's hold down Alt and scale along this axis here. So we're going to pull those. I'm not going to pull the depth. Maybe we should pull the depth in just a tiny bit. We're doing a little bit of guesswork here, but I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to pull this in just a bit, and then I'm going to let go of Alt and I'm going to pull it up just a bit. So we've made this a little smaller than our Boolean version here. Make sense? Now, this isn't real. This is just, if I go in here to polyframe mode, you'll see this is just an object, and as I move this object around, that's a live Boolean, which is totally cool and very, very useful. However, in this instance, it's not real. It's just a live Boolean. If I turn this off, you'll see, oh, it's just a shape sitting there. In order to make this real geometry, what I'm going to do, and if we want to even zero mesh this, I'm not saying you would need to do this, but let's talk about it, because why not? I'm going to go up to this base. I'm going to say crease level all the way up to 15. So we're going to smooth it. You know, if I do Shift D, which is turning off our dynamic, here's our actual geometry. I do want it to be nice and smooth, but I don't want to have any fall off. I'm going to let just the 3D printer take care of aliasing at the scale and giving us a nice fall off there. Same thing for this shape here. I'm not going to give it any fall off. And one of the things you can use to your advantage, if I go into solo mode here, is I have a polygroup here, polygroup on the side, polygroup on the top, and we can even go to this Boolean shape and say group by normals. Give me a polygroup for every single side. Not saying you would need to do this for in this example. You could literally just Boolean it, make sure it's watertight, and just print it out. It's fine. But if you ever want to use this to your advantage, you can say, okay, I got polygroups where I want them. So I'm going to go down here to our Boolean. I'm going to turn on dynamic subdivision because we have that in use here. Make Boolean mesh. That's going to make a U mesh out here. And this geometry is going to be total garbage. It's just literally taking this really low res mesh and Booleaning it with this higher res mesh. However, you can go in here to like zero mesh half, dot size down to 0, keep groups, smooth groups down to 0, zero mesh, and it's going to look at those polygroups and keep them, and then zero mesh this, so you have a nice result with all your polygroups intact. And then at this point, you could say crease PG, crease level of 1, smooth subdiv of 2, and now you've got something nice and modeled. You can go in and change the edge loops or whatever you want. So again, not that I would need to do that for what we're doing, but just in case that's interesting to you, go for it. I'll keep it because it's cute. And so we'll go back here to our working file here, and we'll say, hey, we don't need these anymore. So this is our busted one with the hole in it for our key registration. So we'll go ahead and say delete, delete, and then we'll say this one, we'll say append, and we'll just grab back our UMesh here. So now again, hopefully this thing goes bloop, right in there. And then this thing is, and again, it's a little bigger. Again, we're working at, you always got to remember, this is like 1/32nd of a millimeter there. So hopefully it picks that up. So we've got this here, and then we've got our Rancor. So now we need to have this appended or booleaned into this guy. If we're not worried about our subdivision history anymore, and we're saying, hey, you know, this guy's ready to go. Let me just fix this here. He's kind of got a wobbly belly. And we're just good to go. We can just literally, if I just turn everything else off but these two, I can merge this down, hit W, and go in here and say remesh by union. That'll create a Boolean union mesh. I can merge this down and dynamesh this together. You might lose some detail, you know. Actually, I need to clean up some of this stuff, but that's okay. So just be careful with that. Or, I'm trying to think. I guess to play it safe and not lose any detail, Boolean is probably your best bet. Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. So I'm just going to say, hey, I'm going to merge this down. You don't even have to merge it. If you want to merge it down and use the remesh by Boolean, you can. You can just have this sitting here, though, and say, hey, I want to do another Boolean. I'm not going to have dynamics turned on because we're not using it. We're just going to say make Boolean mesh. That'll Boolean this object with this low-res object here. And then if I go here to my UMesh, now we have this mesh here. Now, if we're sending this to a 3D printer, especially printing at the scale that we are, we probably don't need all this detail. So what I'm going to do is go in here to Decimation Master, Preprocess Current, and we're just going to knock this down. We're going to go from, actually this isn't terrible, but again, it's not a bunch of information we need to send to our printer. Oh, stretch. So we'll say, go in here to polyframe mode, and we'll say how many we want to do. Maybe 180K. So we'll type in 180, hit decimate current. There we go. It decimated it down, kept all our detail, made it more lightweight. I think we're okay. I don't know. That's something you can fill out, but maybe you want to play it safe. Maybe 220 decimate current. Once you've pre-processed it once, you don't have to keep pre-processing. You just go in here and say, I want to try 10. Oh, too low. I want to try 50K. Oh, another thing too. Oh, I should show you that. So let's see, 200K decimate current. Oh, we're also using our UMesh. So let's hop back into our working file here. This is, we'll go ahead and just say insert our UMesh. If you don't need these anymore, you can say, you know what, let's delete this out of our scene. You might want to keep them around or save a file off, but I'm not too concerned about that. Now, here's another cool thing. If we have this, I'm going to duplicate this off so we can just go into solo mode and I can show you. Hit W, let's turn off live Boolean. There is a, I should have showed this in my video, remesh by dynamesh. So when you remesh by dynamesh, there is a project, smoothness, target polygon count. So there, when you first pull this, it'll have to kind of process. Oh, not remesh by dynamesh. That's another cool one. We want to do remesh by decimate. Remesh by decimation. So the first time you, there it is. The first time you pull this target polygon count slider, it's going to pre-process. See, pre-process, pre-process. Once that's done, you can now go through here and then just pull. So we're going to go from, you know, here's 27,000, here's 11,000. So you can just kind of update on the fly. It's not quite as fast. So we'll just delete this out of here. Same thing, similar thing to proxy pose, and maybe you could use this to your advantage. I don't know. If we go to geometry proxy pose and you just crank in this reduction amount, see how fast that is? It's doing the kind of the same thing, you know. So if you just want to be like, hey, I want to decimate this down, just use proxy pose. You can just kind of go in here and dial in the detail amount that you want really quickly, and then just say make polymesh 3D. That'll kick out a copy of it. Then you can come back in here and you can say, you know what, take that out of proxy pose. maybe use that to your advantage. So we've got this, we've got our base. These are our safe bases. So here's our base, here's our U-mesh base, here's our posed Z-sphere thing, skeleton. All right. Okay, we've made our first little miniature. How about that? So I'm gonna go ahead and save this as I'm gonna put this under recording, sorry, not streaming. Rancor miniature. Yay. All right, I'll go print that out. Sorry, old hard drive has to kick in. So now we were gonna talk a little bit about, you know what, I'm gonna try something real quick because I have a working file here. And we can talk about some other functionality. So I'm gonna go, oh man, where is it? Oh yeah, that's right. This is Elegoo Mars 3 Pro. There it is, reptile armor print. So here's another cool thing. I'm printing, so this is a 3D print that I'm making. And again, I'm printing it small, and I didn't originally create this thing to be small print. So I have my original mesh here. This is my original 25 million polys? Really? No way. Damn, Mike. Usually don't work that high. Here's my original 25 million polygon mesh. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. I don't need to see the thumbnail for this. Remind me how bad I am at silhouettes. So here's my original mesh. However, I do have a version of this mesh that's been booleaned and dynameshed and projected and history projected so that it's all decimated down. And but if I ever want to, this is a cool thing, if I'm ever like, I want to, let me see if I have an area that's a little bit iffy. Let's say there was one area that didn't quite have enough detail where I wanted it. I can always get that detail back because all I got to do is go here to my original. Again, control tap that point in history to store these vert positions in history. Go back to this one, do BHR for my history recall brush, turn on Sculptris Pro, and then you can go through here and you can project while subdividing the geometry, or tessellating the geometry. So you can go through here and project detail back from the original and tessellate at the same time to get you more resolution. So you can go through here and just kind of clean up these areas. If the performance isn't that great, go through here and just grab a little piece and that'll increase your performance so you don't have as much geometry kind of sitting there. So you can go through here and you can up-res and project at the same time. So pretty cool. And then of course you probably want to go back and re-decimate this down. So decimation master. However, here's another cool thing that just happened in ZBrush 2023.1. And I haven't really played with it that much because I haven't made the videos, but I can maybe fumble my way through it for you. For example, we now have under document, we have a drop 3D. So this geometry is fairly crappy and pretty low res, right? However, if I go through here and you know what, let's switch over here to Skin Shader 4. Boop. I said boop, there we go. Okay, so you can hit drop 3D and now we're in 2.5D painting mode. So we can go through here. Here's a simple brush. So a simple brush with this alpha, you can go through here and you can literally just sculpt on your object. It's not, boy, we need to switch this out. Sorry, I thought, let's go out of drop 3D mode and then back in. Okay, so basically we're dropping this 2.5D. We can't rotate the object. However, we can use these 2.5D brushes. So if we go in here to say our layer brush, I'm going to say a sharper alpha here. We can go through here and we start sculpting. It's looking like we're sculpting on the object, right? However, we're really not. When we go out of drop 3D mode, what it's going to do is mask around that area, and it went ahead and it subdivided this area up to what it needed to be in order to capture that sculptable detail that you were doing. So if we undo that, the other cool thing about that, if we go in here, and you might see it's like it wasn't super high quality. This subpixel size determines that. So the lower this number is, the more geometry it's going to throw at you in order to achieve the high resolution result that you want. And the higher this is, obviously the bigger the polygon size on the resulting mesh. So we have a layer brush here. We can also go in here to like your line tool. So as we're going through here, we can drag a line out. and then just keep dragging lines out and doing geometric stuff. The other cool thing about this too is because it's 2.5D, this goes back to like my Eat 3D days. I haven't talked about this stuff since like, God, many years. But what you can do is you can hit W on your keyboard and then you can just move this around. So it's not static. You can go through here, move, scale, and rotate. If you go in here to scale, you can do a uniform scale here or a non-uniform scale if you grab one of these top areas. It gets it a little bit weird. You can do a snapshot. So Shift S, W, drag out a copy. Shift S, drag out a copy. You can switch it from Z add to Z sub on the fly. So, and in fact, I think, yeah, strokes, you can't do that. So you can do this in a 2.5D way. Let's let that autosave here. And then when you're ready, you can just pick it up. It'll go through and again, mask where you want it to be. Where did I go? I don't know where my mesh went. And it should pick it up and give you that detail back. I'm going to go ahead and let's kill that hotkey thing. I don't know if that was doing something weird. So that's really cool. And there's some other strokes I can show you. And also you can use it for poly painting too. And there's some stencil stuff we can do. This is all stuff that Paul and Ian did. So it's nothing new that you haven't seen if you've watched those videos. But this is me doing it. So I'm going to keep doing it. What are we doing? Oh, yeah. Recording. Mars. There we go. So let's try that again. Here we go. And then we got, you know what? I don't need to reproject back here. I'm just talking about other stuff. So I'm going to delete this just to kind of clear up my memory here. So again, we have crappy decimated geometry, but we want to do a little bit more resolution-y stuff on here. So it's all under this document here. We're going to say document, drop 3D. We got access to all of these cool brushes here. Again, the single layer with an alpha. Let's do alpha 06. And then these strokes are really cool too. So we've talked about the line stroke. There's line 2, which means you can spread these alphas out, I believe. So we can go in here to like spacing and drop that up. Drop it up. There you go. So you can kind of go through here. And again, you can do W and then Shift S and you can drag out copies of this. And then when you're ready, you can say undrop my 3D and then it should project back. Let me see what's going on here. Let me do a fix mesh. Just making sure there's nothing weird going on. Thank you. And you know what? Let's do a close holes. And Control W and drop 3D. Another cool thing about this is, do I have this installed? Z plugin, IMM extractor. Damn, I didn't install it. That's okay. Let's go out of drop 3D mode. I'm going to say go out of edit mode, hit Control N to clear my canvas. There's an easier way to go about this. There's an IMM extractor, but I'm just going to go through here with this. I'm going to say BI brush insert. IMM model kit. Your icon will be a little different than mine because I added stuff to it. Then I can hit W and I can go through here and I can select other brushes or just other objects basically. I'm just looking for an object here. So we have an object here. I'm going to hit Control D a couple times just to make sure it's nice and smooth. I'm going to go back here and we're going to say, I'm just wondering why this is acting so weird. I wonder if it's because of the shape. I don't know. So we're going to say drop 3D here. And instead of going in here and doing like, which you can go in here and do like single layer brush stuff we've been talking about. You can even do like grid here with all your grid settings in here. You can do radial with different alphas. So you can just pull in these. And again, you should be able to drop it on your alpha. And again, this is Z add. You can switch it to Z sub, you know, and do all that cool stuff. Also, you can go in here to drag rect and you can just select a mesh and then you can just drag that on your mesh. And then if you hit W in here and you just drag on the outside, you can see it'll lift it off the mesh and then push it into your mesh. So you can go through there and you can move, scale, and rotate this. If you always want it to be pointed at you, remember you do have your picker options in here. So picker orientation, you can say click and that this little arrow will point you right at is your camera based view here. So if we hit Q to go out of that mode and then we drag on, this will draw right out to the camera. And then again, we can inset this a little bit more using W and also moving it around. You know, you can just kind of move this where you want to, or scale it, move, scale, and rotate, etc. And then once you're done with that, going out of drop 3D should grab that geometry, but it doesn't seem to be doing it. Give me a second. Let's do a test. Let's go in here to our comma key, because the one I saw, it was there. Okay. I'm just concerned here. So here we have this. I want to make sure thick skin isn't off. Okay. So drop 3D. I got my frog selected. I got a simple brush with drag rect. Let's switch this over to dot stroke. Okay, so we got our simple brush. We have our layer brush. Single layer brush. Great. I can always hit W. I can go in here and I can move it around. Great. I can switch this alpha out. I can set it to radial. Single layer. I can set it to Z sub. Great. Drop 3D. Okay, that's working. And again, if you want higher resolution, just make sure you go into drop 3D and choose subpixel size. This will be a smaller amount. Okay. Oh, and then another thing we were doing was our ability to go through here, and actually this one might be better. It's fine. So let's undo that. Another cool thing too is, let's go out of edit mode, hit Control N. This is another thing they showed. So a Z sphere, drag it on our canvas, go into edit mode. I'm going to turn off my floor. So we can make titleable textures really easily with our document. So what we can do is we can go out of edit mode, and then as we just, usually for like a new ZBrush user and you don't know what you're doing, you go in here and you just grab a thing and you start drawing stuff out on your canvas. That's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm actually going to draw stuff out the middle of my canvas, hold down the tilde key, which is just underneath your escape key on the upper left. Hold that down and then pull in your document, and you'll see it starts tiling. So you can go through here, and again, stay away from the edges because you want to maintain the illusion of tiling. We're just going to use our tilde key to kind of fill this in here. Yay. And because this is a 2.5D document, you can go in here and you can say, what were they using? Like maybe the smudge brush. You can go through here and you can kind of like smudge these things around if you want to. Whatever 2.5D brushes you want to use to kind of enhance whatever the effect is. This is basically an image with height information. To grab that height information, you can go in here to alpha, and we can say transfer, and you can say grab doc, and then I'll grab your document. And again, this is a tiling alpha document. Great. So let's go back to our tree frog here. And then if we want to transfer that alpha to our object, a cool way to do that is along with drop 3D. So we can say drop 3D, we're in 2.5D painting mode. And then in our alpha, we can say, hey, grab this alpha and then make a stencil, make ST, and then hold down spacebar. You can move, scale, and rotate this around. And this is really cool. So underneath stencil, you can go in here and you can say alpha repeat. So you can repeat this up a bunch. And again, it's tiling, so you're good to go. And then another really cool thing you can do is say wrap mode. That will look at your underlying geometry. So while you're moving the stencil around, it'll wrap to your geometry. So you can move, scale, and rotate. Let's see, rotate and the S. There we go. So we can rotate this around. We can move it into place. And then once we're done, because we're dropped 3D, we can say, let's switch this back over to a dot stroke. Single layer is probably fine. You could even do it with polypaint if you wanted to. So while you're polypainting, oops, let's set it to Z add. So while you're polypainting, it'll actually go through here and start, let's turn that alpha off. There we go. So we're going to use our stencil and our drop 3D. Let's turn the alpha. Let's do an alpha 06 maybe. There we go. That's a little bit better. So we're using our stencil and our poly painting and all the little things we can use to our advantage to go ahead and create this on our object. And if I want to move, you just got to go in here to drop 3D off, and then we'll go ahead and control drag to unmask. We can turn our stencil off so we just don't see it. Or you can just kind of rotate around to a new area on your mesh and then hit the space bar, and we're still in wrap mode. So again, it'll just kind of wrap, and then you can move, scale, and rotate this in here. There we go. And then again, drop 3D, and then continue to go through here and just kind of paint these textures on here. along with height information. So once you're done with this, undrop, go in here to stencil, turn that off, unmask, and then you can use that to your advantage. They showed off some poly painting stuff. Sorry, I'm just stealing what they already showed us, so apologize to everyone. But we'll go in here. So we got mRGB with this brush. We can say color. Let's just do RGB. Color, fill object. And then it works with poly paint as well. So if we want to go through here and say drop 3D and then go into a simple brush with a drag rect stroke and then say maybe a really sharp alpha 14 maybe. And then we'll change our color. So when I drag this out, and we'll turn off, you can do Z-add if you want to, we'll turn off Z-add and we'll just do RGB. So we'll drag this out. And then again, if we want to position this, just hit W and you can move it into place. And then we'll go back in here and we'll change this color and we'll drag this out like so. And again, you can hit W to position it. There we go. And then once you're done, you can go in here to drop 3D and that'll just drop. It's just doing it to the poly paint, but it will go in and change your geometry if needed. Maybe it didn't need to for that. Another cool thing is, again, the ability to do that with geometry. We'll go to hard surface in just a second, but basically we have our eyeballs here, and we do have. I showed you how you can just import primitives. Oh, another thing too. Okay, we'll talk about this. So we have primitives we can just pull from, right? So let's go in here to document, drop 3D, and of course you can set that to a hotkey. If you want, just hold down Control Alt and tap, and then assign it to a hotkey. Again, we'll turn off our alpha. We have drag rect stroke here. I'm going to just choose a sphere. So when I pull a sphere out, it'll add it. Let's go in here to Z sub, hit W, and then again you can use a sphere to kind of go through here, move, scale, and rotate. Just hit E on your keyboard, and we'll uniform scale this up, and then W to move it around. So we've got this, and then maybe I want to do an additive one now, so we'll go in here to Z add, and we'll just add a sphere here, and we'll hit W, and we'll put this into place. Great. And then we'll go out of drop 3D, and there we go. So now we have, in this case, we want to do geometry modify topology mirror and weld across the X with delete lower. Oh, you know what? It probably didn't update that geometry because we had subdivision history. So when we did that poly paint, it was like, hey, I'm just going to drop the poly paint on there. Because we had subdivision history, that's what it was doing. Same thing with this one. It probably didn't update the geometry because it had subdivision history. But in this case, it worked actually pretty well. So you can use it with subdivision history if you don't want it to change the geometry. Or, and I'm just going to do a quick mirror and weld. If I want to get those back, I can just hit reconstruct. Doop, doop. So there we go. Or you can delete lower or just turn it into a Dynamesh or whatever, and then it'll update the geometry if there's no subdivision history. Interesting. That's really useful. I'm glad I'm doing this now as my dry run so that when I go to record this later, I'll be better. Sorry to use these as my guinea pigs. Okay, so there was another cool thing I want to show you. Let's go in here to this one. Get some hard surfacey. This is Joseph's Drush drone. Let's turn off perspective, turn off floor, let's turn off poly paint. Oh, there we go. And then Alt tap like this one here. There we go. So now this is just a nothing mesh. I think it's just probably, by nothing I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean there's not a whole lot of geometry there. So if I go in here to dynamic subdivision, you see dynamic on and off. If I do Shift D, that turns dynamic off. It's just a very low res mesh. If we're going to be doing drop 3D or any sort of 2.5D work, remember you can always hold down Alt and tap on that surface and then Shift tap that Z direction to put your camera exactly looking straight down to this object. So when we go through here and we're like, okay, great, I want to drop 3D. It's under a document here, drop 3D. Just like we were talking about earlier, now we're in 2.5D mode. We can switch this to line stroke with an alpha. There's some other interesting brushes. Directional brush is good. I haven't played with a bunch of these, but single layer is usually my go-to. So single layer brush with a single layer brush with a line stroke. So we can go through here and I say, okay, oh, here's another thing too. Let's make that a little bit harder of an alpha. There we go. So I'm going to put this one here. And let's say, so we already know we can do this, and then we can hit W, Shift S to store a snapshot, and then move a copy over, right? However, what we can also do is hold down Control as we're dragging out lines. So while you're holding out Control, that'll go ahead and it's making it into like one stroke. So essentially now when I hit W and I want to move this around, it's going to move all three of these, and then Shift S to source snapshot. Paul showed this off too. So totally cool, right? And then we can go out of Drop 3D. That'll update your geometry. Again, remember to change your subpixel size smaller if you want higher quality, and it'll go through and subdivide what it needs to get that result. Now, one thing I don't think I've seen, but is, oh boy, new functionality. Okay, we got 10 minutes left. So here I'm going to go to BI Brush Insert IMM Industrial Parts. We're just going to grab any brush that we want to capture from, and we're going to go in here to Alpha, and there's from IMM. So if you just tap that button, it will store those alphas as a sheet. Store those IMM shapes as a sheet of alphas, I should say. So we can use that to our advantage. We can go in here to W. Again, Alt tap this, Shift tap here, frame this, say drop 3D, and then now we have alphas we can pull from. So let's go in here to the alpha stencil. We'll switch this back to a draw stroke, single layer, or simple brush if we want to. We'll do single layer. We'll go back into stencil mode. So we've got this alpha selected. We're going to say make stencil. We're going to turn off wrap mode. And then we're going to say space bar. Again, move, scale, and rotate. So we can scale this up. We can rotate it like so, just to kind of position it. And again, kind of move it into place. And then you can use your stencil to kind of go through. Oops, let's turn off the alpha here. To go through and just kind of paint, you know, these little alphas on here. And then once you're done, we can say stencil off, and then we can say drop off. There we go. So now we've used stencils. Oh, another thing too, I think you can adjust last. Oh, I unmasked. So when you just hop out, you can go through here and you can modify. You can push this in, you can pull this out. So you can actually go through here and adjust last on the fly. Neat. Was that it? Stencils, I'm in. I don't have my notes open, but I think that's a lot. Only way to get proxy posts is subscription, not perpetual license. If you bought the 2023 perpetual, I think it should be in there. I really don't know, but the best way to stay up to date, I suppose, is the subscription model. Sorry if I missed any questions. Yes. Sorry. Slimer Center for the mouth open. Want to use ZBrush to close the mouth? Yeah, totally. And ZBrush is really nice to like make nice feathered selections and all that stuff. So totally doable. Create an edge with ZModeler like Maya. It kind of depends. Like for example, we have this here. Let's do Shift D. A lot of different ways to create edges in ZBrush. So in Maya, it would be something like you would go in and do like an insert edge loop like this, or you can go in here and you can say insert multiple edge loops. We'll go ahead and keep the polygroup for now. You can do, let's go ahead and say insert. You can extrude edge loops. All you got to do is just go in here and say extrude. So it's a ZModeler brush, BZM. And you don't have to use that. You can actually go in here and slice. So sometimes it's useful to go through and just kind of slice an edge loop. So you can just go through here, Alt tap twice, and you can just slice an edge loop here. And then let's hit Control W. Let's say delete an edge. We can actually split this edge if we want to. Yeah, let's rotate this. Basically, all your functionality is in that modeler brush. If you want to go through here and say, what was I doing? Split over an edge. There we go. Split. And then we can slide if you want to. So you can say slide by brush radius. You can kind of slide this down if you want to. And then we can say delete. And so you can also store different types of ZModeler brushes. So this ZModeler brush, it's got everything set up like this. You'll notice I have ZModeler slice and ZModeler topology. So you can assign a hotkey to these, and these are actually sitting in your brush menu if you need them. So hit comma on your keyboard to go into Lightbox, and then underneath your brushes, ZModeler, in here, you can just load these up. So this one, basically what it is instead of storing a hotkey for like, oh, I want to insert an edge loop, well, you can make a ZModeler brush to be insert, or in this case, let me just switch to one. If I want to slice things, go in here to ZModeler slice. You'll see edge is set to edge slice mesh. Point is set to points slice mesh. Face is set to slice poly. So now I have a ZModeler brush set to go through and slice through my mesh. And that way what I can do is store another copy of my ZModeler brush that'll actually have 3 hotkeys in one. It'll have an edge hotkey, a point hotkey, and a face hotkey for that brush. So yeah, there's that. Oh, this is what we're gonna talk about really quickly. If I go in here to my, is it my recording? Yes, it is. So we were talking about, can you use proxy pose on multiple subtools? Yes. Now, as of this recording, let's hit F the frame here. Sorry. There we go. As of this recording, if I wanted to go through here, I believe, and say, okay, I want to hit for this geometry, we want to go in here and say hit proxy pose. There it is. Proxy pose. Boop. We can do that. And then I say, okay, great. Since it's a tool, I should be able to go in here and say apply last action to all subtools and then say okay. It's not going to update. You'd have to go through here, just hit the down arrow. If you don't want to look at everything, just hit the down arrow. That'll go through your subtools, and then you just hit proxy pose, down arrow, proxy pose, down arrow, proxy pose, if you want. And then once you have this, we have multiple, and we want to go ahead and pose this, right? This is where we can go in here to Z plugin, transpose master. And here's a cool thing. So we can go in there with a Z-sphere rig. This is just going to give us a single Z-sphere. However, we can actually store and paste rigs that we've made. So really quickly, I'm going to say append a Z-sphere. So we're running out of time. X symmetry, E to scale this down, transparency mode. We'll go ahead and set up a really quick skeleton. And also, I'm not going to bring everything in here out. So I'm going to alt tap the shell and just turn all the shell stuff off. I don't need this little flowing thing here or this here. These are all things I can just move later, so I'm just going to not show them. And then my Z-sphere here, again, go back into transparency mode, Q, draw, W, hips, Q, draw, W, toes, Q, move, Q, move, Q, move. And this is a little bit more normal anatomy. So here, top of the head, I'm not going to do jaw control. Base of the neck we'll need. This is top of the rib cage. We'll do a little lumbar here. And then out from here, we'll go ahead and do, I guess we can do clavicle control. Yeah, why not? And then we'll do shoulder. And then again, I'm not going to bother doing the fingers. We're just going to go to the wrist, and we can pose the fingers afterwards with just transpose and masking or whatever. And then elbow. And then we want a little chest control here. So out of this area here, and again, you can turn off transparency. Oop, turn off ghost if you wanted to snap to your object as you're drawing. And we'll do one more. Again, these are just the child helper joints to maintain volume. I'm probably going to have a little bit of an issue here. Because again, anything that's down the middle of the object is going to start binding to the legs. So I'm going to put a little bit of a helper here. And then just like we did with the Rancor, we'll put a little volume preservation back here for that booty. Okay, so we have this Z-sphere rig sitting out here. I'm not going to send it over a transpose mesh, but I can say that and say store my rig. So I can save this file off as its own rig, load it up as a Z tool, go in here and say store rig. So when I go through and I say, okay, I want to transpose all of these subtools together. Let's turn off transparency. I can say, okay, let's transpose mesh with the Z-sphere rig. T-pose mesh, that's going to take my proxy pose along with my subd level 1 for all my other objects, or just my other objects if there's no subdivision history. It's going to give me the Z-sphere. I'm going to say paste my rig. That'll go through and paste the rig that I had in memory, and then I can go down here to this rig. And again, let's go to adapt to skin, density 1, dynamic resolution down to 0, rigging, bind my mesh. So now when I go through here, I can rotate this around. So this is exactly what I ended up doing. Let's turn on X symmetry here. When I did my folded arms pose for this one here, actually I'll just pull it up here. I was doing some really goofy stuff, sorry. Let's see, recording, thumbnails. So this is exactly what I did. It was just basically take something to level 1, put a quick rig in it, move the stuff around. I didn't even have to do that much correction, like almost none. And then I just had my little pose turtle here. I guess we don't need that anymore. So, oh, and that was another one too. This little Burt Reynolds Rancor up here was all just proxy pose, quick rig, put it into place. So yeah, whoa, X symmetry turned off. Let's bend them, oops, rotate, there we go. You got to do your sound effects. You got, and so now as we're bending the leg, we do have the volume preservation here. We can use this kind of a sculptable thing. So now we're just kind of moving everything in a hierarchy kind of position. Again, we have a proxy pose and subdivision level 1. So if I want to hop back out, we can go transpose to sub T. That'll move everything back into its position. And then for our proxy pose, all it did was move those verts. They still have the relationship. So I can just turn proxy pose off. My high res will come back. And then all the stuff I didn't want to move, like the shell that I just want to keep on its own, I can just go through here and say move multiple. So I'm going to say U, come back, hit W. Let's go ahead and say move multiple. I'm going to undrag over everything. And we'll say I want to grab, oops, W, U, and U. Where did everything go? I want U, and U all to move together. Sorry about that. So now I can go through here and just kind of mass, oops, let's turn off X symmetry. Mass move these like hard surface areas here. We can just kind of move those into place. Oh yeah, and then let's turn everything else back on. We can turn the rig off. And then these ones too, we can say move multiple, undrag, drag over. There we go. Yeah. Ding. All right, 8 o'clock. We made it. Dynamesh and sub D meshes, both of them, as if you're talking about proxy pose. Cool. Turn the background to an all gray. Like yours, my background is black. Gradients in my work area is small. So here's how you fix that. So go in here to your document, and if you click on the back right here, just click and drag. You can actually select any color you want. So I'll just pick like a nice medium gray, or you can just select from your interface if you want to make it dark gray. The other thing you need to do is go in here to document range. So this is probably what it looks like now. Turn your range down to 0, and then go down here to save as startup doc. And that will, every time you start up ZBrush, it'll bring in this document. If your document's small, so let's turn this, we'll say resize. Yes. So let's say your document's not quite taking up all the space. Again, document, background, change the color, and then document, hit this W size, and then hit new document. That will make the document fill up all of this area here. So now when you're working on stuff, you have access to the entire area. And it's not oversized, so you're not wasting memory. And then again, document, store, or save as startup doc, and then that'll keep that. So every time you start it up. Yeah, cool. When you drop an IMM, would the dropped IMM be distorted if perspective is off? Yeah, if you're talking, drop 3D and then you use the IMM brush, it is literally just an alpha. You're exactly right. So it'll if it's like tilted and it looks good from you for your point of view, your camera point of view, and then you undrop the object and you rotate to the side, it'll go straight back. So not as maybe useful as like using an IMM brush, but just another option for you in that particular case. Cool. Thank you, Walt. Oh man, what I don't know could fill a warehouse for sure, like the big warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. If the object is big, yeah. Well, if the document specifically, because you can go in here, it's like, hey, I want to capture this. I want to render this. I want to render this in like 1920 by 1080. Well, you can go in here to your document and say turn off proportional, and then say 1920 tab 1080, enter, and hit resize. Yes, and just so we can see a little bit better, let's go in here to document back, and we'll just pick a really obnoxious color. So now if I hit Control N, our document, so you may be thinking like, okay, I want to render this out and I want to save it as a beautiful something to post to my ArtStation. So I'm going to hit BPR to render. It's rendering shadows out. And then once it's done, I can say, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can go in here to render pass, and you can just say, just click this to store your composite 1920 to 1080. You can also go in here, I think, to document grab doc, or you used to be able to, I forget. Hey, we'll just go in here, composite, just click this, and we'll go ahead and save this onto our desktop as a, I'll save it as a PSD file. So Photoshop BPR composite, hit save. The problem with this is if I hover over this, you'll see a preview. See how in my document it looks like he's pretty close to the top and the bottom, but then when I'm exporting this, he's actually kind of floating. That's because we can't see our whole document. So you can go in here to document, zoom, and we can zoom out, and you can see, oh, that's our actual document size. So now I can, render this as a 4K, 8K, whatever I want to, position this appropriately. So now when I hit BPR render, and then we go and export this composite, it'll be the full 1920 by 1080. However, if you're ever working in ZBrush and you're just kind of sculpting, you don't want, let's go to document, actual. You don't want a bunch of extra pixels just sitting, wasting memory outside of the document window. So that's why we go in here to document, W size, new document, and that will just make a document with these pixels right in here. So if that makes sense. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. If I can spell. Have a good day. And I'll see you on my channel on Thursday. We'll figure out something else to do. Bye.